Dawn Walker, the radiant bride whose smile lit up a church, and Ryan Matthews, the proud groom who vanished before sunrise, began their wedding night as symbols of love, but ended as the center of a chilling mystery, one that would uncover obsession, betrayal, and a killer hiding in plain sight. Dawn Walker had been preparing for this day since she was a little girl. Friends remembered how she used to sit on her porch steps, flipping through bridal magazines and pointing out the dresses she loved most. To everyone who knew her, Dawn embodied optimism and kindness. At 27, she had built a life she was proud of. She worked as an event planner, was close to her family, and carried a reputation for always being the one to show up when people needed help. Her relationship with Ryan Matthews was viewed as the natural progression of her seemingly perfect life. He was successful, charming, and well-connected in town. Their engagement had been the talk of the community for months, and when the invitations went out, no one was surprised at how extravagant the plans were. The wedding was held at a countryside church with tall windows that let in the golden light of early September. The pews were filled with relatives, neighbors, and colleagues. Dawn walked down the aisle in a flowing white gown, the veil shimmering softly with each step she took. Gasps of admiration followed her, and her radiant smile made it easy to forget the whispers of doubt some had shared privately about Ryan. To the crowd gathered that afternoon, the ceremony was flawless. The vows exchanged, the rings placed, and the kiss sealed what looked like a storybook romance. After the ceremony, the celebration carried on in a large hall decorated with strings of fairy lights and tables covered in roses. Guests filled their plates from an elaborate buffet. The champagne flowed endlessly, and laughter echoed across the room. Music played late into the evening, and the bride and groom danced as if no one else was in the room. The photographer captured moment after moment, from the cutting of the cake to the cheers during speeches that celebrated love, trust, and the future ahead. But beneath the perfection of the evening, subtle details went unnoticed. Ryan seemed distracted during certain moments, checking his watch more than once. Dawn, though glowing, occasionally looked away with an expression that suggested unease, as if her smile required effort. Their interactions, while affectionate, lacked the natural warmth one might expect from newlyweds. Still, most guests overlooked these fleeting observations, too caught up in the joy of the occasion. As the night grew older, people began to drift away, offering their congratulations before heading home. Close friends and family stayed longer, savoring the final hours of celebration. It was nearly midnight when Dawn and Ryan prepared to leave. Guests lined the pathway outside, holding sparklers that lit up the dark night as the couple walked toward the vintage car waiting for them. The sight seemed pulled from a fairy tale, the bride clutching her dress while Ryan waved to the crowd. No one present could have known that this would be the last time they saw Dawn alive. The couple drove off to the lakeside inn where their bridal suite awaited them. Guests went home, replaying the images of the perfect wedding in their minds. Many later admitted that they fell asleep that night believing they had witnessed the start of a long and happy marriage. Dawn, the girl who once dreamed of walking down the aisle, had achieved everything she had wished for. Her journey from childhood fantasies to a stunning wedding day seemed complete. By morning, however, the illusion of perfection would shatter. Dawn Walker's name would no longer be associated with a bride's joy, but with a crime that shocked the town to its core. The vows she spoke in that church would echo as her final words, binding her not to a life of happiness, but to the haunting memory of her untimely death. The morning after the wedding began like any other quiet Sunday in the countryside. The sun rose gently over the lake, casting a soft reflection across the calm water. Birds chirped in the trees surrounding the inn, and the air carried the freshness of early autumn. The innkeeper, a woman who prided herself on attention to detail, moved through the halls preparing breakfast for her guests. She expected the new bride and groom to remain asleep after the long night of celebration, yet something about the silence near their suite unsettled her. The door, which should have been firmly locked, stood slightly ajar. At first, she assumed it was nothing more than carelessness, but when she pushed it open, the scene inside froze her in place. The suite looked untouched. The bed was still neatly made, the champagne bottle resting on the table unopened, and the delicate arrangement of flowers set by the staff remained pristine. It appeared as if no one had spent the night there, yet on the floor, near the center of the room, lay Dawn Walker. Her wedding dress, once pure and glowing under the church lights, was torn and stained. Her skin was cold and pale, her body stiff and lifeless. The veil that had symbolized the happiest day of her life now lay crumpled beside her, tangled in her hair. Her eyes, fixed open in a glassy stare, carried the silent shock of someone whose final moments had been filled with terror. The innkeeper rushed to alert the authorities, and within minutes the room became a crime scene. Detectives and officers poured into the building, their radios crackling with urgency. They examined the suite carefully, searching for signs of a struggle. Strangely, there were no broken locks, no shattered glass, and no forced entry of any kind. The window was slightly ajar, but there were no footprints outside, no mud tracked across the carpet. Everything looked eerily undisturbed, except for the body lying in the center. The discovery raised an immediate question. Where was Ryan Matthews? The groom's belongings were in the room, his jacket neatly folded over a chair, his phone left on the nightstand, but he was nowhere to be found. His car sat parked outside the inn, untouched, the keys resting in his bag. It was as if he had simply vanished. News of the tragedy spread quickly, rippling through the small community like wildfire. By mid-morning, friends and family who had been at the wedding were receiving phone calls filled with disbelief. The bride, who had stood smiling in photographs only hours before, was now the victim of a brutal crime. Guests struggled to process the impossible shift from joy to horror. Many recalled the sparklers, the laughter, the cheerful farewells, never imagining those moments would be the final images of Dawn alive. Investigators began piecing together a timeline. Witnesses remembered seeing Ryan and Dawn leave the reception around midnight, waving as they climbed into the waiting car. Nothing about their departure seemed unusual. If Ryan had indeed arrived at the inn with Dawn, what happened between that moment and the discovery at dawn remained a chilling mystery. The untouched champagne and the unused bed suggested that they had never settled into the room, leaving detectives to wonder if someone had intercepted them upon arrival. Speculation spread rapidly. Some believed Ryan had killed his new bride and fled into the night, perhaps weighed down by secrets he had kept hidden until that evening. Others whispered about the possibility of a stalker, someone obsessed enough to intrude on what should have been the most private night of a couple's life. The lack of evidence made every theory plausible, and every person connected to Dawn a potential suspect. As investigators zipped the body bag around Dawn's fragile frame and carried her away, the inn that once promised romance and seclusion became a place of dread. Yellow tape blocked the bridal suite, and officers guarded the door, determined to preserve what little evidence there might be. The air inside the inn was heavy, suffocating, and no amount of autumn sunlight could pierce the sense of sorrow that now hung over it. The perfect wedding had transformed into a chilling mystery overnight. The bride was dead, the groom was missing, and the guests who had toasted to eternal love only hours earlier now faced the grim realization that they had unknowingly attended the prelude to a tragedy. The story of Dawn Walker's wedding was no longer about joy or celebration. It had become a nightmare, one that would consume investigators, friends, and family as they searched for the truth hidden behind the walls of the lakeside inn. The hours after the discovery of Dawn Walker's body brought an intense focus on Ryan Matthews. To investigators, the missing groom was the most obvious starting point. He had been the last person seen with Dawn. He had the closest access to her, and now he was gone without explanation. The sight of his car still parked outside the inn only deepened the suspicion. It suggested he had not gone far, yet no one in the area reported seeing him. Officers searched the nearby woods, the lakeside path, and the roads leading back into town, but Ryan seemed to have vanished into thin air. Detectives began to reconstruct his background, hoping to find answers in his past. On the surface, Ryan's life seemed enviable. He was a rising businessman in the local real estate market, known for his charm and ambition. Yet as financial records were pulled and interviews conducted, cracks appeared in that polished image. Ryan carried significant debts, the kind that could not be easily explained away. He owed money to business partners and had been under quiet pressure from investors. There were whispers of risky deals that had collapsed, leaving him scrambling for ways to recover his losses. Friends described him as confident, but some admitted that confidence often slid into arrogance. He had a history of turbulent relationships, marked by jealousy and control. A few even suggested that Dawn had hesitated before agreeing to marry him, though she never openly admitted doubts. In the days leading up to the wedding, those closest to her noticed moments where she seemed withdrawn, as if something weighed on her mind. But Dawn never gave voice to any fears, and on the wedding day, she put on the radiant smile everyone expected. Investigators considered the possibility that Dawn might have discovered something about Ryan, perhaps a secret that shattered her trust. If an argument erupted on their wedding night, it could explain the violence in the suite. The lack of forced entry pointed towards someone she knew, someone she would have allowed inside without hesitation. Ryan fit that description perfectly. His absence looked like guilt in motion, a desperate escape before the truth caught up with him. Yet not all the evidence aligned neatly. Witnesses recalled seeing Ryan leave the reception earlier than Dawn. Several guests reported noticing him slip away while Dawn lingered, talking to friends and family. If those accounts were accurate, then Ryan might not have arrived at the inn with her at all. The carefully staged suite, with the untouched champagne and the undisturbed bed, seemed to support the idea that Dawn entered alone or with someone else. That possibility unsettled detectives, for it meant another person could have lured her there. Despite the gaps in the timeline, Ryan remained the primary suspect in the public eye. Headlines cast him as the runaway groom, a man who had turned the happiest night of his bride's life into a nightmare. Television reporters camped outside the police station, while neighbors speculated endlessly. Some were convinced he had planned the murder in advance, intending to escape under the cover of darkness. Others believed he had been overwhelmed, panicked, and fled after an impulsive act of violence. Theories swirled, but none brought clarity. Days passed, and the search widened. Helicopters scanned the lake, officers questioned travelers on nearby highways, and local motels were checked for any sign of Ryan. Still, there was nothing. His disappearance became as haunting as Dawn's death, a mystery within a mystery. For investigators, each unanswered question pushed them deeper into uncertainty. Was Ryan truly a killer on the run, or was he himself the victim of a larger scheme? The truth remained just out of reach, and the case grew colder with each hour that passed. In the shadows of suspicion, grief clung to Dawn's family. Her parents, who had proudly watched her walk down the aisle only hours before her death, now faced the unbearable task of planning her funeral. The town that once celebrated her happiness now whispered about betrayal, obsession, and secrets hidden beneath polished smiles. The perfect bride was gone, and the man who had promised her forever had become the face of suspicion. But even as detectives followed the trail of the missing groom, they began to wonder if focusing on Ryan alone would blind them to the darker truth lurking just beyond their reach. As the investigation dragged on, without a trace of Ryan Matthews, detectives shifted their focus, combing through every photograph, video, and witness statement from the wedding. It was during this deeper review that something unexpected surfaced. In the background of several reception photos, a familiar but unsettling face appeared. Ethan Cole, Dawn's former fiancé, had been present that night, though he was never listed on the guest list, and no one recalled him being invited. His presence immediately raised questions, for the relationship between Dawn and Ethan had ended bitterly years before. Ethan had once been the man everyone assumed Dawn would marry. They had dated for nearly 4 years, and their engagement was announced when Dawn was only 22. But as time passed, Dawn grew uneasy with his temper and his possessive behavior. Friends recalled her confiding that she no longer felt safe, that Ethan's love came with conditions and anger just beneath the surface. Breaking off the engagement had been difficult, and Ethan had not taken it well. He withdrew from mutual friends, isolated himself, and carried a resentment that never seemed to fade. Seeing him at her wedding suggested something far darker than mere coincidence. Detectives tracked Ethan down, and his initial explanation was that he came simply to see her happy one last time. He claimed he kept to himself, watched from a distance, and left before the night ended. But his story quickly unraveled when physical evidence tied him closer to the crime scene than he admitted. A latent fingerprint lifted from the bridal suite's window matched Ethan's. There was no explanation for why he would have been near that room, especially since guests were not allowed in the private quarters of the inn. Investigators pressed further, uncovering that Ethan had been seen loitering outside the reception hall earlier in the evening. Several guests remembered glimpsing him near the parking lot, his figure half hidden in the shadows. The discovery reframed the entire case. If Ethan had followed Dawn from the reception, slipping into the inn unnoticed, he could have waited for the perfect moment to strike. The untouched champagne and the immaculate bed suggested Dawn never truly settled into the room, perhaps interrupted by someone who gained entry before she even arrived. Ethan's obsession with her, combined with the humiliation of seeing her marry another man, painted a disturbing picture of motive. Meanwhile, Ryan's disappearance took on a different tone. Instead of looking like guilt, it began to resemble a vanishing act forced upon him. Could Ethan have intercepted Ryan before he ever reached the suite? Could the missing groom have been the first target of Ethan's rage, silenced so he could get to Dawn without interference? The questions multiplied, and with them came a growing unease. Detectives pieced together a tentative timeline. Ryan may have left the reception early, as several witnesses insisted. If Ethan followed him, a confrontation could have unfolded near the lake or along the secluded road leading to the inn. With Ryan out of the way, Ethan would have had both the time and the opportunity to confront Dawn in the bridal suite. The fingerprint evidence supported this, but investigators needed more than theories to prove his guilt. They began to dig into Ethan's recent behavior, uncovering troubling signs of obsession. His neighbors reported seeing him pacing outside at odd hours, muttering to himself. He had been spotted near Dawn's workplace in the months before the wedding, though he never approached her directly. A search of his apartment revealed old photographs of the couple, keepsakes from their relationship that Dawn had long forgotten. Even more chilling were the torn pieces of a wedding invitation, the fragments suggesting he had once held one in his hands, but destroyed it in anger. The case, once thought to revolve around a runaway groom, now twisted into something more sinister. Ethan was no longer just an uninvited guest. He was the shadow that had followed Dawn into her new life, a figure from her past unwilling to let her go. The revelation shifted public opinion dramatically. Sympathy that had wavered for Ryan began to return, while suspicion hardened around Ethan. The tragic story of Dawn Walker was no longer seen as the collapse of a marriage before it began, but as the violent return of an obsession she had tried so hard to escape. Even with mounting evidence, uncertainty lingered. Ryan was still missing, his fate unknown, and without him the complete picture of what happened that night could not be drawn. What detectives did know was enough to fuel dread. The past had found its way into Dawn's perfect day, and the man who once vowed to love her forever might have been the very one who ensured her vows became her last words. Weeks passed with no sign of Ryan Matthews, and the case seemed frozen in uncertainty. The town grew restless, each headline feeding speculation. Was Ryan hiding, consumed by guilt? Or was Ethan Cole the uninvited guest, the true monster who had taken everything from Dawn? For investigators, the pressure mounted with every unanswered question. Then, during a routine sweep of the lake near the inn, divers made a grim discovery. Beneath the surface, tangled in weeds and partially weighted down by stones, lay the body of Ryan Matthews. The groom who once symbolized the town's golden couple had not run away. He had been silenced. The autopsy revealed drowning as the cause of death, but bruising across Ryan's arms and face told a more violent story. He had fought back against someone, but he had been overpowered. The timing placed his death within hours of Dawn's, confirming the chilling theory that both bride and groom were victims on their wedding night. The revelation shattered the suspicion that had clung to Ryan's name. He had not killed Dawn, nor had he fled into the night. Instead, he had been the first casualty of a twisted plan fueled by obsession. Attention turned fully to Ethan Cole. The fingerprint on the bridal suite window, once a haunting clue, now became a linchpin in the case. Combined with his unexplained presence at the wedding and his history with Dawn, investigators began to weave a narrative that pointed directly at him. Interviews with his co-workers revealed erratic behavior in the weeks before the wedding. He had spoken bitterly about second chances, muttering cryptic remarks about not letting her slip away again. His movements on the night of the wedding matched the gaps in the timeline. Witnesses recalled seeing his car parked near the lakeside road, close enough to intercept the couple. Prosecutors built their case meticulously. They theorized that Ethan had followed Ryan from the reception, ambushed him near the lake, and forced him into the water after a violent struggle. With Ryan removed, Ethan's path to Dawn was clear. He entered the bridal suite, possibly waiting inside when she arrived, and confronted her in a storm of anger and obsession. Dawn never stood a chance. Her final moments were marked by fear, trapped in a place meant for joy but turned into a prison of violence. The trial that followed gripped the community. Each detail painted Ethan not as a man who lost control, but as someone who had planned his actions with chilling precision. The torn wedding invitation found in his apartment, the photographs of Dawn he had kept hidden, and the testimony of neighbors who saw his erratic behavior all came together to form a portrait of obsession that had simmered for years. When confronted with the evidence, Ethan offered no remorse. His silence in the courtroom was more damning than any denial could have been. The verdict was inevitable. Ethan Cole was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Yet for Dawn's family, justice felt hollow. No prison sentence could return their daughter. No court ruling could erase the haunting images of her final hours. Ryan's family, too, mourned not only the loss of a son, but the cruel stain of suspicion that had tainted his name in the days after the murder. Both families were bound together in grief, their children stolen by the actions of a man who refused to let the past remain in the past. The Lakeside Inn closed its doors shortly after the trial, unable to escape its association with tragedy. Locals avoided the area, and the once charming venue became a hushed reminder of the night love and celebration were turned into death and despair. The story of Dawn Walker became more than a crime. It became a cautionary tale, whispered in the town's memory, a reminder that darkness can lurk even in the most joyful moments. Dawn's vows, spoken with hope and certainty, echoed through the story's conclusion. Promises of forever had been broken not by choice but by violence. Her life, celebrated by family and friends only hours before, ended in a way no one could have predicted. The perfect bride, the smiling groom, and the fairy tale wedding were all transformed into symbols of how quickly joy can unravel. The case closed, but the shadow of that night lingered, ensuring that Dawn Walker's wedding would never be remembered for its beauty, only for the horror that followed.